Welcome, wherever you are right now, whether you are in your bed with the lights low, or settled into a quiet chair at the end of a long day, or simply drifting somewhere between the waking world and sleep. I am glad you are here. Come gather around the campfire, listen to the crackling, and get ready for a new story from history. Tonight we are going somewhere cold, colder than most people have ever felt or will ever feel. We are going south. Further south than almost any human being in recorded history had ever gone in the year 1914. To a place of absolute white and absolute silence, and a darkness in winter so complete that it presses against you like a physical weight. We are going to Antarctica. Not the Antarctica of documentaries, not the sleek research stations and satellite phones and Gore-Tex parkas of the modern age. We are going to the real Antarctica. The old Antarctica. The one that had already killed men and broken ships and swallowed expeditions into silence before any camera ever pointed at it. And we are going to find there a man whose name you have probably heard, whose story you have probably been told some version of, and whose true character you almost certainly do not know. Because the version most people carry of Ernest Shackleton is a useful one. The heroic explorer, the great leader, the man who kept his crew alive. All of that is true. But it misses something. It misses the texture of what actually happened, the cold of it, the dark of it, the particular quality of a man who never once, in 2 years of catastrophe, allowed the people around him to believe they would not survive. His name was Ernest Henry Shackleton, and this is his real story. So settle in, pull your covers a little closer. If the night is cool, let the day go. Whatever you did today, whatever is still waiting for you tomorrow, set it down for now. It will be there in the morning. Tonight, for the next little while, all you need to do is listen. Ernest Shackleton was born in 1874 in County Kildare, Ireland, the second of 10 children in a family that moved to London when he was 10 years old. His father was a doctor, a practical man, a man who had clear plans for his son. Ernest, by all accounts, was a child who found the world indoors insufficiently interesting. He read obsessively. Poetry, novels, accounts of exploration, anything that described a world larger than the one immediately visible. He had what people around him described as an extraordinary restlessness. Not the restlessness of someone who cannot focus. The restlessness of someone who has already decided that the ordinary possibilities on offer are not the ones they want, and has simply not yet found the door to the other ones. He was 16 years old when he went to sea, not as a passenger, as a merchant seaman. He joined the merchant navy as a cabin boy on a sailing vessel bound for the South American coast, and discovered something that the rest of his life would confirm, that the sea agreed with him, that the motion of it and the scale of it and the requirement it placed on a person to be fully present, fully capable at all times, without the option of half attention, that all of this suited something in his nature that nothing on land quite reached. He rose through the merchant navy quickly. He had his first officer's certificate at 19, his master's certificate at 24. He was, by every account of the people who worked with him in those years, the kind of officer who inspired something beyond professional respect. People followed Shackleton not because they had to, but because something about the quality of his attention made them want to. He noticed people. He remembered what they had told him weeks earlier. He asked about things that mattered to them and listened to the answers. In the hierarchy of a ship, where rank is everything and the distance between officers and crew is structural and deliberate, this was unusual enough to be remembered. In 1901, he was offered a berth on Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery expedition to Antarctica. He was 26 years old. He accepted without hesitation. The Discovery expedition was Britain's first major Antarctic venture in over 50 years, and it wintered on the Ross Ice Shelf, further south than any human beings had ever spent a winter. Shackleton was part of the three-man team that made the furthest south journey of the expedition: Scott, Shackleton, and Edward Wilson. They reached 82 degrees south, a record at the time. They turned back by cold and illness and the absolute edge of what the human body could sustain. Shackleton came home from that expedition with damaged lungs. The severity is debated by historians, but Scott sent him home early. A decision that stung Shackleton in ways that would shape everything that came after. He had been sent home. He was not the kind of man who found that easy to carry. He spent the next years working in finance, in journalism, running unsuccessfully for Parliament. He was restless in ways that the record makes visible even at this distance. A man moving through the available options of a conventional life with the quiet dissatisfaction of someone who knows precisely what they actually need and cannot yet reach it. And then in 1907, he organized his own expedition. His ship, his command, his ambition, the Nimrod expedition. He came within 97 miles of the South Pole, closer than any human being in recorded history, before he turned back. Let that number settle for a moment. 97 miles, less than a day's travel in the conditions of that plateau from the most singular geographical point on Earth. He turned back. He turned back because the mathematics of their food supply made it clear that to continue would be to die on the return journey. He wrote to his wife from the edge of the polar plateau, a letter that has survived and that tells you everything you need to know about him. He wrote, "A live donkey is better than a dead lion." He meant it without irony. He did not romanticize death. He did not believe that dying in the attempt made the attempt more meaningful. He believed in staying alive. He believed in the people in his care. He turned the expedition around 97 miles from the pole, brought every man home safe, and was knighted for it. He was 36 years old. He had almost reached the South Pole, and he had turned back. And now the South Pole itself was no longer the prize. In December 1911, Roald Amundsen reached the South Pole. In January 1912, Robert Falcon Scott reached it too, and died on the return journey with all four of his companions. The race to the pole was over, but there was one great Antarctic prize remaining. One crossing that no one had ever made. The full traverse of the Antarctic continent, from one coast to the other. From the Weddell Sea on one side to the Ross Sea on the other. Nearly 1,800 miles of ice and altitude, and the most hostile terrain on Earth. No one had done it. No one had even seriously attempted it. Shackleton had found the door he was looking for. He announced the Imperial trans-antarctic expedition in 1914, the crossing of the last unconquered place on Earth. He needed a crew. The legend, which may or may not be precisely accurate in its details but has the quality of truth about it, is that he placed an advertisement in a London newspaper. It read, more or less, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success." 5,000 people applied. Whether the advertisement was real or not, 5,000 people applied. Let that sit with you for a moment. He selected 27 men from those thousands. 27 men plus himself. 28 in total who would sail aboard a ship called the Endurance into the Weddell Sea in the Antarctic summer of 1914 to 1915. The ship had been built in Norway specifically for polar work. A reinforced hull, specially braced ribs. A vessel designed to push through ice without being broken by it. They sailed from London on the 1st of August, 1914. 3 days later, Britain declared war on Germany. The First World War had begun. Shackleton offered the expedition and the ship to the Admiralty. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, sent a telegram in return. One word: proceed. They sailed south. The Weddell Sea in January is, in theory, the most navigable it will be all year. The sea ice retreats in the Antarctic summer and opens routes that are frozen shut in the long winter. In theory. In practice, the Weddell Sea is a law unto itself, shaped by currents and winds that drive the ice in patterns no forecast can reliably predict. The summer of 1914 to 1915 was a bad ice year. The Endurance pushed through pack ice that was heavier and more extensive than anything the charts or the experience of the ship's captain, Frank Worsley, an extraordinary navigator from New Zealand, had led them to expect. They were still a day's sailing from their intended landing point on the Antarctic coast when it happened, January the 19th, 1915. The ice closed around the ship. Not dramatically, not with any sudden crash or crisis, just tightening the way ice does, slowly and with absolute authority. The Endurance's engines drove against it. The bow pushed. The bow found no give. She was stuck, one day short of their goal, held fast in the frozen Weddell Sea. They waited for it to release. Ice shifts. Ice opens. This is a fact of the Antarctic summer that every polar sailor knows. They waited a day. They waited a week. The ice did not open. Shackleton made the decision that would define the next 20 months of all their lives. They would not attempt to break free by force, would not damage the hull driving uselessly against something immovable. They would wait. They would manage the ship as a winter station. They would wait for the spring melt to release them. Think for a moment about what that decision required. 28 men. A ship that cannot move. An Antarctic winter beginning its long approach. Temperatures that would fall to -30, -40. Darkness so complete and lasting that the sun would not rise above the horizon for months. No radio communication that could reach any help. No aircraft. No possibility of rescue. Nothing outside the hull of the Endurance but ice and cold and the complete indifference of the Southern Ocean. They were alone in a way that is very difficult to imagine from the warmth of wherever you are right now. Shackleton did something that the historical record makes very clear, and that every man who survived would speak of for the rest of his life. He set about managing not just the ship, but the interior lives of 27 men. He understood that the greatest danger they faced was not the cold. It was not even the ice. It was the slow collapse of morale in men who were confined and powerless and could see no horizon of rescue. He kept routines. He kept mealtimes. He kept the cook, a man named Charles Green, producing warm meals at regular intervals, because the ritual of a shared meal does something to the human nervous system that no amount of rational reassurance can replicate. He kept competitions, sports on the ice, dog sled races across the frozen surface. He assigned the most stable men to bunk near those he judged most at risk of anxiety or despair. He managed the social dynamics of 28 people in a sealed space with the attentiveness of someone who understood that a community, any community, is only as strong as its most fragile member. He did not allow public expressions of hopelessness, not in an authoritarian way. He simply modeled every day, in the way he spoke and moved and sat with people at meals, a certainty that they would be all right, that the situation was difficult, that it required their best, that they would give it, and that they would go home. The Antarctic winter came. The sun disappeared below the horizon on the 1st of May and did not return for 69 days. The temperature dropped to levels that turned the breath to ice crystals before it left the mouth. The sea groaned and shifted beneath the frozen surface. The ship creaked constantly, the wood settling and stressing under pressures that had no human scale to measure them. The dogs were on the ice during the day, running, alive, necessary. The men found in the dogs something they could not always find in each other: uncomplicated warmth, unconditional response. The reminder that energy and appetite were still possible in this place. Winter passed, the sun returned. The quality of light changed slowly over weeks. The ice showed in certain places the dark lines of movement that suggested the long grip might be easing. And then in October 1915, the pressure changed. Not in the direction they had hoped. The Weddell Sea current, which had been holding them drifting slowly north all winter, began to shift. The ice began to close again. Not loosening, but tightening. Massive plates of frozen ocean, driven against each other by currents that operated on a scale beyond any individual force to resist. The Endurance began to be crushed. It happened slowly, and then very quickly. The hull groaned. The deck planking lifted in places. The bow began to rise as the pressure built beneath it. Shackleton ordered the men to unload supplies onto the ice. He watched the ship that had carried them this far being destroyed by an ocean that had no particular opinion about any of them. On October the 27th, 1915, he gave the order to abandon ship. The men had been preparing for this. They moved from the ship onto the ice with the efficiency of people who have been quietly rehearsing this moment for weeks. 3 lifeboats were lowered, the supplies they had staged, the food, the fuel, the navigational equipment, the tents. They camped on the ice. Behind them, the Endurance continued to be compressed. Her stern rose higher. Her masts tilted at angles that had no relationship to the horizon. She was already a wreck, though she had not yet slipped beneath the surface. On November the 21st, 1915, they watched her go. The stern rose. The bow went first. The masts described a final arc against the polar sky. And then she was gone. The ocean closed over her as though she had never been there. And the men of the Endurance were standing on a moving ice floe in the Weddell Sea, with 3 lifeboats and no ship, 600 miles from the nearest land. Shackleton turned to his second in command, Frank Wild. He said, "Ship and stores have gone, so now we'll go home." They could not go immediately. The ice was still too solid to launch the boats, but not stable enough to travel safely on foot. They would wait, drifting day by day on a floe that the current was carrying slowly north toward open water. They lived on the ice for 5 months. Camp Patience, they called it. They rationed. They shot the dogs, because carrying the dogs in the boats would be impossible, and there was no other way. And several of the men could barely speak of it for years afterwards. They ate seal and penguin. They kept the routines. They told stories. They read aloud from the books they had saved from the ship. They slept in shifts in tents on ice that was always moving, always groaning, always speaking in the deep registers of a language none of them had been trained to understand. On April the 9th, 1916, the ice broke up enough to launch the boats. They were on the open ocean in 3 lifeboats, the largest of which was 22 feet long, in the Weddell Sea in autumn. The temperature was below 0. The seas were what the Southern Ocean always is in autumn, vast and grey and relentless, and utterly indifferent to the men upon it. The boats were open. There was no shelter from the spray that froze immediately on the men and the gear and the gunnels. Shackleton barely slept for the entire passage. He moved between the boats. He watched the ice ahead. He watched the weather. He watched the men. He kept them moving. After 6 days and 100 miles of open sea sailing, on April the 15th, 1916, they landed on Elephant Island, a small, rocky, inhospitable piece of land at the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, the first land any of them had stood on in 497 days. Some of the men kissed the beach. Some simply sat and put their hands in the wet stones and stayed there, not moving, not speaking, just feeling solid ground, the extraordinary luxury of something that does not shift beneath you, something that is simply there. Elephant Island was not rescue. It was uncharted and uninhabited, and no ship had reason to pass anywhere near it. It was solid ground and it was survival, but it was not the end. To find rescue, someone had to go and get it. Shackleton looked at his men. He looked at the 3 boats. He made a calculation. He would take the largest lifeboat, the James Caird, with 5 men and sail to South Georgia, the nearest inhabited point on Earth from their position, 800 miles away. 800 miles across the Drake Passage, which is the stormiest ocean on the planet, in a 22-foot open wooden lifeboat in Antarctic autumn. He selected the 5 men. He left Frank Wild in command of the 22 remaining men on Elephant Island, with orders to build shelter under the upturned boats and to wait. He said he would come back for them. He had never yet left a man behind. The James Caird launched on April the 24th, 1916. 17 days. That is how long the crossing to South Georgia took. 17 days in seas that ran 40 feet high, in temperatures that hovered near -20, in a boat so small it vanished in any swell above 10 feet. They navigated by sextant, by stars when the stars were visible, which they frequently were not. They were soaked without pause. Their sleeping bags had become so wet and so frozen they were more dangerous than helpful, trapping cold against the body rather than warmth within it. Frank Worsley took sextant readings from the heaving deck whenever the sky cleared enough to see the sun. He calculated their position from a moving platform in the worst ocean on Earth and was accurate to within a few miles across 800 miles of open water. You know how it feels when everything depends on one thing going right, and you watch that one thing hold. The particular quality of that. How you breathe differently around it. Imagine watching Worsley. The sextant raised to his eye. The boat lifting and falling in swells as tall as houses. The calculation made by hand, checked, written down, handed to Shackleton. Every day on that crossing there was a moment like that. And every day it held. On May the 10th, 1916, they raised the coast of South Georgia. They had done it. They had crossed the Drake Passage in a 22-foot wooden boat and found an island roughly the size of a county in the middle of the Southern Ocean. They had landed on the wrong side. The whaling stations, the inhabited parts of the island, were on the north coast. They had landed on the south coast, separated from safety by a range of mountains that had never been crossed, that were not mapped in any useful detail. Shackleton, Worsley, and Tom Crean, an Irish sailor of such remarkable endurance that he had already walked 35 miles alone across the Ross ice shelf to save another man's life, left the other 3 men to recover at the landing site and set out across the mountains. They walked for 36 hours without stopping, without sleeping, through passes in darkness and snow and fog, navigating by instinct and by the most basic tools of orientation. The lie of the ground, the direction of the wind, the sound of water moving somewhere below. They crossed a glacier in the dark. They descended a snowfield too steep for any other method of descent by sitting together, all 3 of them locked into a makeshift toboggan of coiled rope. And they let go, and they dropped 500 feet in minutes and came to rest in the snow at the bottom, breathing, intact, moving again before the fear had time to catch up with them. On the morning of May the 20th, 1916, they walked into the whaling station at Stromness on the north coast of South Georgia. They had not washed in months. Their clothes were black with blubber smoke and salt. Their beards were long and matted. The station manager, who had known Shackleton from previous expeditions, did not recognize him. He looked at the 3 figures standing in his doorway and asked who they were. Shackleton said, "My name is Shackleton." The station manager turned away. He could not speak for a moment. They organized the rescue from South Georgia. It took 4 attempts to reach Elephant Island through the sea ice that kept thickening as the Antarctic winter deepened. Shackleton was on every attempt. The record makes clear that he did not sleep much during those weeks. He could not. 22 men were on a beach at the bottom of the world waiting for him. On August the 30th, 1916, the rescue ship broke through the final ice and reached Elephant Island. Frank Wild had kept the men alive, kept the routines, kept the belief, each morning when he woke them, that the boss was coming back. He had woken them every day with the same words. Lash up and stow, boys. The boss may come today. Shackleton counted them from the deck of the rescue ship as they came down to the water's edge. 1, 2, 3. He counted all 22. Every one of them. Not one man lost. Not on the ice floe. Not in the boats. Not on the island. In 2 years of shipwreck and Antarctic winter, an open boat voyage and mountain crossing, he had not lost a single life. He wept when he counted 22. He did not make much of it later. He wrote simply, "I had done it." Ernest Shackleton returned to Antarctica once more in 1921, leading another expedition. He died of a heart attack on South Georgia on January the 5th, 1922, before the expedition had truly begun. He was 47 years old. His wife was asked whether his body should be returned to England for burial. She said he should be buried on South Georgia, that it was where he belonged. He is there still. In a small cemetery at the whaling station at Grytviken, a short walk from the place where he arrived out of the mountains, unrecognizable and alive. The grave is visited every year by the scientists and sailors who pass through. By tradition, they leave a toast. There is a quality to what Shackleton did that is not quite captured by the word leadership. Though that word is used about him so often, it is worn smooth with handling. What he actually did was simpler and harder than leadership, in the way we usually understand it. He decided at the beginning, when the ship was still moving, and the situation was still merely difficult, that none of them would die. And he did not allow himself, or anyone around him, to revise that decision across 2 years of circumstances that argued powerfully for revising it. He did not do it by being fearless. The record suggests he felt the fear the same as anyone. He did it by refusing to let the fear be the loudest voice in the room. Every morning, in the tent, on the ice, in the lifeboat, in the mountains, he was the voice that said, "We are going to be all right." And because he believed it, and because he was the kind of man people needed to believe, they believed it too. You know how it is when you are with someone who is genuinely calm in a moment that frightens you, the particular quality of that calm, how it reaches you before any words do, how it lowers something in you that you did not know was raised. That is what he was for 27 men at the bottom of the world. He was that calm. He was that certainty. He was the voice that said, "Not tonight, not one of us, not today." History is full of people who achieved extraordinary things. It is less full of people who, in the process of achieving them, refuse to leave anyone behind. That is the rarer quality. That is the one worth carrying. You have travelled a long way tonight, down through the cold and the dark and the endless white of a world that asked everything of the men who entered it, and you have watched one of those men refuse, with a quiet and absolute stubbornness, to give anything less than everything back. Now it is time to be still. Let the cold go. Let the dark go. You are warm. You are safe. The ice has passed. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.